great to see you back for another night. This is our third evening as we are learning about the Holocaust, learning from the Holocaust. In week one, we looked at evidence, right? There is clear evidence that the Holocaust happened. So week one was evidence. Week two is trauma of a nation. This week, we are looking at deliverance. That is the liberation of the Jewish people. Deliverance. I'd like to start by reading a portion of Scripture from Isaiah chapter 14, and perhaps I've got this on PowerPoint, James. And we'll see if we can get that up there. You see, I'm taking the Holocaust and the Second World War and putting it into the context of this prophecy. Okay? Now, I admit this is Nigel's interpretation. But hey, I'm the pastor and I'm here and I have the right to do that, right? Yeah. Okay, if God had have called you to give your interpretation on this, you would have been in my place tonight, but you're not, so I have to do it. Okay? But look at this as we read. The Lord will have compassion on Jacob. That's Israel, of course. Jacob is Israel. Jacob, the father of the 12 tribes. In fact, his name was changed from Jacob to Israel. And compassion doesn't come out of a vacuum. There was a reason for God to show compassion to Jacob, because of the great and enormous tragedy that had just happened to him. The Lord will have compassion on Jacob. Once again, he will choose Israel and will settle them in their own land. I like that once again the Lord will choose Israel. You know, on the 29th of November 1947, the United Nations went to vote. And they put it to the vote, shall we allow the Jewish people to have independence? A nation state in Palestine. And there was a lot of toing and froing and behind the scenes manipulation and twisting on the political scene, on the diplomatic scene. And the Israelis are very good at that, right? They're very good at behind the scenes coercion. They do a great job. They need to. And it was no less so on the 29th of November because they needed a 2/3 majority in the General Assembly of the United Nations to give international sanction for their right to have a state. They just got through. They just got through. In the end, it didn't matter because the Lord had already cast the vote. And when God's vote says yes, nobody can say no. The Lord will have compassion on Jacob. Once again, he will choose Israel and will settle them in their own land. Whose land is it? It's their own land. It's not Palestinian land. It is their own land. Foreigners will join them and unite with the descendants of Jacob. I think particularly in the early years as they're coming back, they got a lot of help from foreigners, volunteers. Even today, in the land of Israel, that is full of volunteers, foreigners who've come in to assist. Nations will take them and bring them to their own place. I think of the early flights coming in with the Yemenite Jews coming up, the Iraqi Jews, and even the Ethiopian Jews in 1984, 1991, the help they got from international airways or airlines, originally with international pilots, American pilots, British pilots, because the nation was still formatting itself and bringing itself together after being born. And Israel was born with its guns blazing. It had to. It was defending itself against an ungodly invasion, wanting to wipe it out. But they did get assistance from foreigners. And Israel will take possession of the nations and make them male and female servants in the Lord's land. I remember in the early years, in the 70s particular, you know, we had New Zealanders going over to do their kibbutz work. And that still happens today, John. I hear you, John. That still happens today. They will make captives of their captors and rule over their oppressors. This is, I see the Nazi hunters in this part. They will make captives of their captors. You know, they've gone after the Nazis. They're still actually finding, just in the last few months, I remember reading a news item of more they have found in Germany and bringing to justice after 70 years, 70 plus years. And you know that they're quite right in their ideology, the Nazi hunters. The fact is, while these guys live, they should not be given rest to think they have to come clean. I mean, as a Christian, if there's any hope for their salvation, they must come clean. A full confession of what they've done. Okay? So they will make captives of their captives and rule over their oppressors. I don't know what you call oppressors, whether in the 1967 war it was Egypt, Syria, Lebanon. In 73 it was Egypt and Syria. Today it could be Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, and other. But they rule over their oppressors. And I think that is for sure. We know that Israel is strong. But it has to be strong, right, Lemore? It must have a strong defense force. It will rule over their oppressors. And then we go on to read, on the day the Lord gives you relief. Now, we just talked about the Lord will once again choose Israel. He'll have compassion on Jacob. He will choose Israel and settle them in their own land. Now, from a historical perspective, he will settle them in their own land. He'll have compassion on them. He'll choose them. Well, we could put a date on that and say, okay, the birth of the state of Israel, 1948. Okay. Like I say, this is my interpretation into the prophecy. On the day the Lord gives you relief from your suffering and turmoil and cruel bondage, and from the harsh labor forced on you. I certainly see the Holocaust in this. These are the sketches of a guy called Alfred Cantor. Alfred Cantor was a Czech Jew who was a young man at 22, and he spent time at Auschwitz, at Theresienstadt first, in Auschwitz, and then he was forced on the death march into another camp in Germany at the end of the war. And Alfred, of course, because he had an artistic bend to him, he, in the displaced persons camps in 1945, at the end of the war, he decided to put into sketch form and into paintings the things he had witnessed with his own eyes, so that he could have evidence for himself, for others. This is what happened in the camps. And you see that Alfred has put in here the caption there, I think. Let me find it. The caption that he has there is, these are working girls, their hair cut off, nothing but rain and mud. And these are his comments at the bottom of his sketch, which you don't have on your screen. The few who were found capable of carrying out man-like tasks were kept in women's camps, barefooted in sub-zero temperatures. I'm saying this because we just read from Isaiah that on the day the Lord gives you relief from your suffering and turmoil and harsh labor forced on you. And again, this caption that Alfred has with this painting, he says, Sunday morning sport, he calls it. It is of advantage to head the group as the guard is in the rear. In other words, it's better to be at the front than at the back where the guard is. Labor has no use since there were no roads. The primary target was to weaken the prisoners' resistance. So he's saying they have to do all this harsh labor for nothing. The scheme was to wear them down, because they, as well as gassing them in the chambers, they were trying through attrition, through deprivation of food, malnutrition, and through harsh labor to wear down their resistance to disease, whatever, until they would drop. Okay? And Alfred has another one, this one here. Now, obviously, he's witnessed this stuff in the camp. This is Auschwitz. And you can tell that English is not his first language. It's his second language. He speaks Czech. And so he scribbled out some words to change them. But this is called carrying heavy rocks. So the SS guard laughs. What's the matter with you, lawyer? That's heavier than a pen, isn't it? This is what they witnessed. Because we're talking about Isaiah's words where he said, on the day the Lord gives you relief from your suffering and turmoil and harsh labor forced on you. And perhaps one of the most poignant sketches is the sketch he's done of the naked woman going either to the left, which would mean to the trucks, which will lead them to the trucks which will lead them to the gas chambers, to the crematoria. Or if you're going to the right, you're going for further labor. They've picked that they can get some labor out of you before you drop. Just pointing out of the harsh labor that Isaiah was talking about. On the day the Lord gives you relief from your suffering and turmoil and from the harsh labor forced on you. Ethan Heiber was the biographer of the 6th Prime Minister of Israel, Menachem Begin. Quite a famous Prime Minister. Menachem Begin was what we would call today a hawk, very much on the right, a true Zionist. And Ethan Heiber, in doing his biography, this is an educated Israeli. I don't know if you've ever heard of Ethan Heiber. Wrote the biography of Menachem Begin. And he wrote in his book, describing the harsh labor that his people, the Jewish people, suffered in the Holocaust, he said, and I quote, "Nazi Germany was undoubtedly the cruelest enemy the Jewish people have ever known." And when you size that up with what happened to them in Egypt, right? In Egypt, they were under bondage to the pharaohs, building the big cities and harsh labor. And you think of other times throughout history, but there was nothing like this, the Holocaust. That's what Isaiah was talking about. On the day the Lord gives you relief from your suffering and turmoil and from the harsh labor forced on you, you will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon. Now, to me, the king of Babylon, again, interpretation from Nigel. Of course, we know human kings of Babylon. King Nabopolassar was the founder of the Babylonian Empire. His son Nebuchadnezzar came along and actually destroyed Jerusalem and the temple, and ruthlessly slaughtered many Jews in their homeland before taking the rest of them into captivity into Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar, Nabonidus, I think, was his son. And Belshazzar was the last king of Babylon before Cyrus, king of Persia, came and took over Babylon. So this reference to the king of Babylon, I want you to understand something else, that there is also a spiritual entity, the king of Babylon. What I'm saying is that the same spiritual entity that was in Nabopolassar, the first king of Babylon, jumped from him to his son Nebuchadnezzar, and then jumped from him to his son Nabonidus, and then jumped from him to his son Belshazzar. And that's who I am saying we're talking about as the king of Babylon here. And then it jumped to others throughout history. Because what was the aim of Babylon? As far as the Jewish people is concerned, it was to destroy the Jewish homeland and to destroy the Jewish people. And that's what Babylon set out to do. And that spiritual entity that I just described to you, the king of Babylon, jumped from them. It's in a point of history into one called Adolf Hitler. And that's who I believe we're talking about, the king of Babylon, because what Babylon set out to do, in other references, the daughter of Babylon, the offspring of Babylon, would seek to complete and finish. The destruction that Babylon started, Hitler would seek to complete with the annihilation and the destruction of the Jewish people. So you'll take up this taunt against the king of Babylon, how the oppressor has come to an end and how his fury has ended. And by the way, just as a matter of interest, that's one of the earliest discoveries of a swastika found in ancient Babylon, Samarra, in I think the 2nd millennia before Christ. Just to point out that the swastika was not something that originated with Hitler. As I said, this is from Babylon. And the point is, we're talking about the daughter of Babylon in Hitler. Of course, the yellow star was not the original idea of the Nazis either. It had been tested throughout the centuries, and in ancient Babylon in the 7th century AD, the Jews in Babylonia were forced to wear perhaps not a yellow patch like this, but a yellow patch. Okay? So I'm saying to you that Nazi Germany was the daughter of Babylon. And we haven't got time to look at other scriptures, but we can do that at a later time. You'll take up this taunt against the king of Babylon, how the oppressor has come to an end and how his fury has ended. You know, another alternative reading, and Jewish Bible scholars say that a more clearer rendering of that which you see underlined is how the exactor, the gold gatherer, has ceased. And so there goes some of this is a stash of Nazi loot they found in a salt mine in Germany at the end of Germany's reign, okay? This is a stash. In there was the the silver, gold, coins, nuggets. In fact, Ittima, my other Jewish friend from Havelock North, his father, after the war, was carrying gold bars from one side of Switzerland to the other. He was a cog in a machine that was taking gold, I think, from Switzerland and feeding it to people who would give the Jewish survivors in displaced persons camps free passage to the ports in France so they could load onto vessels to go back down into Palestine after the war. And Ittima told me the other day, he said, my father told me, Nigel, that sometimes those suitcases would weigh between 20 and 30 kilograms. They were just gold bars. He said they were very heavy. But this is what the Nazis were doing. They were storing gold. They were refining everything down. This is from the Buchenwald concentration camp. These are gold rings taken from the prisoners. And of course, you know the history. They took even the gold teeth fillings from the Jews and from others, and they melted it down. And this is what I think the prophet was saying in this verse here. How the exactor, the gold gatherer, has ceased. We go on to read, the Lord has broken the rod of the wicked, the scepter of the rulers, which in anger struck down peoples with unceasing blows, and in fury subdued nations with relentless aggression. I think that will do. And I want to end on this note. All the lands are at rest and at peace. They break into singing. Remember we looked at the first verse. The Lord will have compassion on Jacob. Once again, he will choose Israel and settle them in their own land. But we just read that it would be through a time of struggle. Okay? We talked about the exactor of gold, the harsh labor, this entity called the king of Babylon. And now we're saying all the lands are at rest and at peace. They break into singing. In the context of World War II, this is the 8th of May, 1945. We know it as VE Day, or Victory in Europe Day. Some of the pictures, this is all the lands are at rest and at peace. They break into singing. I heard one television commentator talking about the end of the war in Europe, and he described it in these words. Let me find it. He said, the end of the war in Europe resulted in the greatest outburst of joy in the history of mankind. That was his explanation. And I've heard stories from those who were alive in those days, and that's pretty much what they were saying. All the lands are at rest and at peace. They break into singing. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, who passed away earlier in the century, before she died, she said, the two most memorable days in my life were, number one, my marriage to King George, and number two, Victory in Europe Day. Winston Churchill said on that day to the British Empire, including New Zealand, he said, in all our long history, this is our greatest day. The prophet Isaiah simply said, all the lands are at rest and peace. They break into singing. And so we have this has to sort of be balanced. This is one side of the end of the war, is the victory, the celebration, but the other side is this, the liberation of both death camps and concentration camps. This is the liberation of Dachau, one of the main Nazi concentration camps. The pictures I'm showing you are the best side. This is the best side of Dachau. It's been liberated, okay? And of course, these guys are happy they have been liberated. Dachau in colour from 75 years ago. I didn't want to get too graphic in what I showed you, but that's the most graphic I'll show you tonight. In fact, what you're seeing here was the real picture. As in every concentration camp, every death camp, carriages, cattle wagons filled with decomposing bodies, because at the end of the war, everything was chaos. They were locked into these cattle cars, and no one thought to open them and set them free from there. At Bergen-Belsen camp, there were 60,000 inmates still alive when the British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen, and 10,000, 12,000 soon died of a typhus epidemic. They had to burn the buildings down to try and deal with the typhus. British bulldozers at Bergen-Belsen dug huge burial pits and bulldozed these lifeless skeletal forms lying all around the camp. That was the burial of the victims at Bergen-Belsen. And as far as Dachau was concerned, I used to be a great fan of watching documentaries on the war. I remember one United States, American female journalist describing on the program the effect that Dachau had on her. She was reporting on the Dachau concentration camp. And she said, after visiting Dachau, I went back to my hotel room, locked myself in the room, and for 3 days, she said, I cried and I wept for the human race. Because what she had witnessed at Dachau. It's just like the prophet said, on the day the Lord sets you free from your suffering and turmoil and cruel bondage. We're talking about deliverance tonight. Liberation. Pretty